So hi everyone. Today we'll be talking about an accelerator approach for migrating applications, one that's better fitted into the cloud, and one that lends to a quick journey, but also assures a successful migration. We'll be talking a little about the Omnicom group and Cloudreach and our journey so far. We'll talk about the common path to migrations, one that served us well until now, but it's mostly poised for large upfront investments rather than pay-as-you-go technologies. We'll tell you a little bit about the common challenges we found while using that common path for adopting applications to the cloud. And then we'll talk to you about the accelerator approach that we came up with. And then we'll dive a little deeper on how we applied the same principles to application groups and applications themselves to keep up the momentum and speed of the application. And then we'll just sum up with some key takeaways that we found out doing this enterprise migration, and they're really the key points that can help you into your journey. My name is Jimmy Etimos. I'm a cloud architect with Cloudreach. We are a premier AWS partner with a worldwide footprint. We're a born in the cloud integrator, and we recently celebrated our 8th year in the business. And this is Alexis Lopez.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Jimmy says, I am Alexis Lopez. I'm currently the Managing Director of Global Network Strategy and Operations for Omnicom Group. I've been in the industry 20+ years, at Omnicom for 15. Had the pleasure of meeting Jimmy during my more recent role as Director of Infrastructure Architecture, as I was leading the migration for Omnicom Media Group to the cloud. But first, a little bit about us as a company. Omnicom, a conglomerate of federated agencies, poised to deliver some of the best talent, creativity, and technology innovations to some of the world's best brands. I'll leave their names out of it to protect the innocent. Moving on from there, being in advertising, AI, machine learning, big data, they're critical technologies that we want to be able to leverage to be able to deliver value to our customers. We acknowledged that being able to do this was going to require certain features such as elasticity and automation and other cloud-native technologies. We weren't necessarily an early adopter of cloud, so we went to AWS and asked, how do we get a partner that we can work with to make sure that we can be successful in delivering these benefits to our clients as quickly as possible. AWS highly recommended Cloudreach, so we reached out to them and began a relationship. After a few very quick wins, we knew we had the right partner and began the process forward with our migrations. Those migrations created the foundation for what we're here to share with you today, which is a method that we like to call the hyper-accelerated approach to cloud adoption. With that, I'll hand the mic back to Jimmy.
Thank you, Alex. So the common path, it served us very well for a while, up until virtual migrations. An organization would start at a strategic high level. It would define the vision and the goals behind the migration. It would secure sponsorship. Financial projections would be performed. Then when the go-ahead, the green light was done, a governance and operating model would be built. How do we work under these technologies? How do we align them with our financial, our operational capabilities? How do we charge back, for example? A transformation, change management controls would be put into place to handle the new adoption. A security posture and governance would be built to base the new technologies and to wrap around them. Then we'd move into application assessments, pick up our initial candidates to migrate. We'd figure out the dependencies between them. How would the data model work under the new technologies? And we'd move into planned lift and shifts, platforms, mostly OS-based back then. And then we'd move into execution while managing the new technologies and the new applications on the new world by the original governance and the cloud OM and the operating model then. So the common challenges that we found through this common path while using it for cloud adoption, these were all disjoint processes. They involved completely different parts of the organization. There was a time gap between them that was almost dictated by the large investment that was there most of the time. That time gap between them kind of forced a waterfall type model to them. So not really aligning to today's cloudy or agile ways. That same waterfall model forced a one-way information and direction. One stage would have to follow blindly whatever direction the previous stage defined. It was many times that we had to make compromises actually and fall under the previous governance because the migration just had to move along and there was no time to go back and change strategic or operating model parameters, especially if you had to go a couple of steps back. The departments and the people that actually went through those phases were disengaged now, so it was hard to re-engage them and step back and change parameters. Having that time gap between those phases actually made each phase's inertia really slow, so each phase started with its own kickoff, its own process beginnings. It had to review whatever was done from the stage before and align to that. And by the speed that emerging technologies are coming out now, a lot of times we found ourselves discussing and viewing newer technologies and how those would affect us before we even executed completely the previous migration. Cloud is the new normal. Agile is a way almost all development efforts work right now. So we thought we'd treat each stage as an application, as a product. Build a really minimum viable product for each stage and move along. The times actually help with this as well, right? Cloud is the new normal now, so countless organizations have already moved there. The benefits we see and are described for at least a couple of years now. It was a really easy decision to say, do we have sponsorship? Does the cloud look right for us? Let's move on and create the operating model. Let's create our cloud operating model. Then we can go back based on that and refine our strategy. After we start the operating model, we can actually make a more educated decision that do we want to go with a hybrid cloud, want to go with single cloud or multi-cloud, for example. Then while we build a cloud operating model, again, let's focus on a minimum viable product. Let's build enough financial governance, enough operational governance. If we're sure enough about the base of how these applications are going to go in, let's go to application assessment. Let's get one of our larger applications, and move a sanitized development environment in there. Now, by this point, we actually had an application in the cloud in half the time from the original projections. Half the investment, not even, with a very small investment, both monetary and in effort. By putting an application in the cloud, we could actually go back and refine our operating model and our governance. We go back and refine those points. We went in, for example, with limited tagging, and then we refined it. We went in with a base security structure that was good enough, and then strengthened it. Now it was our own footprint that actually defined our cloud operating model and our strategy. We went back and refined everything with our own footprint. Now we had our own footprint to start testing backup technologies, monitoring solutions. It wasn't just designed on paper on a single independent stage that never saw an application in there. We were actually basing all our designs on our own footprint.
A key element here was having a good partner, right? Planning is something that we all do in practice, but having that planning process happen with a partner that has experience in doing this over and over again is a key element to being able to do this very, very quickly. On our own, we might not have been able to plan the right VPC size and how many availability zones we wanted to deploy for a given application. But when working with someone who's had this experience over and over again, they're very able to tell us, what other vendors had done and what their experiences were, whether they needed 2 availability zones or 4. So we didn't have to build an environment, find out that we hadn't built it out correctly and have to rebuild it again. Planning traffic flows correctly, making sure that you're going north to south and not east to west within your VPC across availability zones is critical in saving and reducing costs. So we didn't do this only to learn after the fact that we were spending more money than we needed to do. So while a lot of this may seem fundamental, it's the combination of the process and the partner that really yielded the accelerated approach that we were able to develop.
So, and those were not really the only benefits. By integrating these processes and aligning them in time, multiple parts of the organizations were involved at the same stage, at the same time, really promoting cross-pollination and synergies. There was no time gap between them, so hence there was no loss of momentum. We were moving really fast. The agile and continuous improvement nature of this yielded all the benefits that we talked about before. Each stage had the chance to both refine the one after it, but also the one before it. It was not people defining things on paper, but now our applications as well. Our own footprint made and adjusted these definitions. There were better holistic decisions because it was all you could hear in the water fountains or in the kitchen, because everyone was actually involved into this. Everyone started thinking in a really cloudy way, in a really agile way. Like we said, we reached a fully supported POC in less than the time that we originally projected, and we made some optimistic projections to begin with. The acceleration didn't shorten the time, so we didn't really cut down from operating models or strategy decisions. We simply realigned them. So we gave them the same effort, but just aligning them correctly seemed to move the enterprise a lot quicker.
Yeah, some of that alignment was adopted by taking on a new world, old world mentality, right? So first we engaged all of the right resources across the organization, from a security perspective, from a finance perspective, from an application perspective, an infrastructure perspective. We made sure that we had all the right players, maybe not the CFO, but someone who understood how cost transits from a product to a business unit. Having them in the room at the same time for the right amount of time allowed them to focus their energies and efforts so that we could move through this very, very quickly while not detracting their focus from our day-to-day operations and the business that we ultimately have to run. That was a process or a method that we felt was very critical to this part of it, making sure, one, we had all the right players, and two, that we were able to give them that ability to dedicate on new world efforts as opposed to their normal day-to-day functions, which we considered the old day.
Yeah, that commitment to new world, old world is really crucial. You give people the effort, the time in their schedules to actually work in new world with a directive almost, like this is the cut time in the week that you have for new world. So people are engaged, they have the time to spend and the effort. So since that worked really well up to that point, we said, what the hell, we'll keep on doing it. We aligned the application waves as well. A lot of applications move into the cloud with very different speeds. A lot of applications are more cloudy ready by nature. Some applications can benefit a lot more by cloudy technologies. But picking just the right pieces of each application that were crucial to that application itself, and then aligning those actually helped us align and timeline the applications. It's such a diagram, let's say chronologically, that it was really fast to move an application into the migration, but just addressing the key cloud adoption aspects that it needed. And then while you moved the next application or an application down the line that then had a different cloud aspect that was important to that, we would just refine back and reiterate on the application before, and without any disruption, be able to fit that piece of technology in the application that was already migrated there. We took an automated approach of creating really automated, reusable, parameterized chunks, so all of these chunks could actually be utilized in the future or to revert back and utilize in an application that we had before.
What we have here is a visual representation of what we consider the approach to hyper-accelerating your adoption of the cloud. It's the three aspects of a migration that we think are critical, right? Your adoption of cloud technologies, the optimization of your processes, and the transformation of the business. At the top, you have a typical migration, which is you build a POC, get the POC production ready, and you cut over to it. But if you go via that method alone, we like to use the term that what you get is your mess for less in the cloud. I'll give Taxman credit for that one. So the hyper-accelerated approach, and how do we apply it, right? So you start by adoption. For ourselves, the requirement was to adopt infrastructure as code. We knew some of the benefits of that would be improved speed right out of the gate because we could reutilize existing code by reparameterizing the systems and redeploying existing code for new applications. We insisted on low-level designs, so each product was fully documented, which led to additional optimizations. And from the beginning, we set up an ops model, a governance model that we knew gave us the foundation that we needed but could be built upon as we moved forward. So we successfully migrated a single application. Wave 2, we started all over again. This time, we adopted a particular service, such as S3, so we could ephemeralize our web tier, remove any unique content from them, and put them off on a shared S3 bucket. That allowed us to, additionally, because of the way we did this, do the same for applications that have been previously migrated. In a Wave 3 migration, you continue to focus on automation. This time we focused on the DB layer, which probably in the initial wave hadn't been automated yet due to some of the complexities in being able to fully automate that stack. We took this approach all the way through. As we've gained momentum, we were able to accomplish more and more. If you go across the slide from one side to the other, right, the goal ultimately is to be cloud native and be able to allow our resources to go back to focusing on the business.
if you can see, that allow us to reach production-ready deployment very fast by just adopting, for this application, the crucial components and having those as code from the beginning. We were able to cut that over, even though the application wasn't deemed fully migrated until a step later, where there was a bigger dependency by many applications. The application was actually in the cloud. Just one of the dependencies was beneficially deemed to take place at a later point. So all the applications would move, would have production ready, and we'd be cut over, shutting down the data center components, and then after that kept on optimizing and had their own path for more optimization and more adoption of cloud services and so forth. And that's what the LLDs on each application allowed us to do at the beginning. It was the synchronous engagement of those teams that enforced that cross-pollination and synergies. People were engaged, they kept on the engagement, the speed kept on moving. And it's really cloud technologies and OpEx models, right? If you had the large investment to procure at the beginning, it would make you a little more cautious for moving from the strategy or moving from the operating model. You would want to make sure you have a definite operating model before you apply that technology and so forth. So it really is up to cloud technologies and the operating model that make this possible. And then, just to reinforce that, parallelizing did not mean shortening the streams. We did not take away from any of those efforts. We simply aligned them better and stretched them better so they would work in conjunction with one another.
Another key takeaway was a partnership with the right third party. Acknowledging that we weren't early adopters, that we knew there were other people with more experience out there that could help us, was fundamental to being able to move through this very, very quickly. Adopting the most beneficial and least intrusive technologies up front, making sure that we weren't bastardizing a product as it moved into the cloud was another key element. And then the iterative process, making sure that as we moved from one wave of migration to another wave, we were reiterating on the processes that we had established before that and improving upon them is what really yielded the momentum that we needed to finish as quickly as we did.
And to promote Cloudreach a little bit too, an MVP is hard to build. You have to address the key main points that would actually give you the base to proceed, and that would actually be open enough to be adopted later. You need to make the key decisions, the decisions that don't force you later to go back and change everything from the beginning. So a third party with a lot of migrations to the cloud experience allows you to easily define those MVPs and make the minimum necessary decisions that you need to just move along. That's about it. We can move to questions if you'd like.
So as you're preparing to move through your accelerated adoption, how did you work through the budgeting that you expected to consume against what your existing operational budget and capital budget was?
We adopted applications that would help us size our on-prem resources. We did total cost of ownership models with AWS to project, right, what they would expect, and then we married the two and figured out where we landed, right?
Hi there. The parallelization thing is what kind of gets me a little bit, right? Like,
right.
We're all from the legacy world of you decide what the parameters are and then you move to the next one.
Yes.
Are you guys just kind of like making guesses and kind of like just real time adjusting them so that there's minor adjustments because you're making a bunch of assumptions on each one?
Right, yeah, no, so that's a great question. A lot of the parallelization comes from the similarities between the applications. So when you're looking at applications that are web natured, there's a three-tier stack typically. So you can work on multiple applications at the same time while you design and improve on each one. So we'd start with a given web application, and we knew we needed to have a web tier, an application tier, and a database tier. We automated as much of that as we could and started the deployment while we began the next phase of conversations on what the next application was. In the next application, we didn't have to worry so much about automating the web tier, for instance, because we knew that was already accomplished and it was just a matter of reparameterizing the code. So we went on into automating maybe the database stack and so on and so forth. So you really need to have a lot of applications that are similar to leverage that technique. But in our experience, we did, and a lot of applications can be done that way.
Overall, do you make some assumptions? Yes, you do. You make some educated assumptions, and that's really the secret on the MVP. You need to really define the key components so you're able to move forward. Are you assuming on some points, on some details? Yes, you are. But you are assuming on things that are easily changeable, easily customizable later on. Otherwise, that speed is not possible. That parallelism is not possible, right? If you spend the time to create a well-defined definition, that probably will change as soon as you have your footprint to the cloud, because then, no matter how much experience a third party has and how much, it's really hard to define a complete operating model and not ever change it down the line. You can get an organization as a consultant, let's say, as cloud ready as possible, as cloud ready as they're ready to be, but they're never as cloud ready as when they have their applications in there. So instead of reiterating just on principles really and best practices, it's to pick those key components, to have that fundamental base that no big changes can affect you. The little changes, the customizable stuff you can do. So yeah, basically you make some educated assumptions going forward.
Based on the challenges which you face, could you tell us, like, for example, there are some applications for the previous model and you are coming to the new model, and what are the changes when you face, what are the challenges did you face? Like mostly, like for example, there's going to be a lot of cost effect in this, like because you are migrating into a new model.
So I think the biggest challenge that you face, right, when especially you're not an early adopter, is the way people think, right? In any adoption to cloud, there's a transformation in the way people think about technology and they think about their applications and their products. There's a transformation that has to come along with how they consider their deployments. Going from very static, hand-built environments to automated environments was one of the biggest transitions for us. We had people on our team who just couldn't see a world where they weren't the ones with the SQL disk in the server. Those are the transformations that you have to accomplish. You've got to show them that there's value in being able to adopt these technologies so that we can go back to focusing on the business. At least for me, that was one of the biggest challenges we had.
That's what really takes a while, is transformation. Transforming the way you think about costs financially, transforming the way you think about security. It's those whole pieces on the stages that people are slowly transforming to adopt to the cloud. That's why that staggered approach was so slow, because people took, and it was completely focused on one piece. And that's what this really helped. I mean, the transformation is what really helped, because we had everyone engaged at the same time. And you can reach that application with a limited budget, really, a limited effort on people's time. You can reach that development environment. Then that was the magic behind it. We really saw transformation happening at all tiers, at all departments in the organization, because now they had the footprint. They were looking at something, right?
How did you manage these challenges with the resources? I'm assuming, like when you're doing the rollout, you're doing it both in parallel. Yeah. You're keeping your legacy, plus you're trying to move the applications to the cloud. So I'm pretty much sure there would be huge challenges on your human resources,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
So could you shed a light on that?
That's a great question, and that's where the new world, old world mentality came into effect. But additionally, we established a migration factory. So along with having dedicated resources across specific times of the day, you come in, you focus on new world, then transition to old world. We got additional resources from our partner, and we partnered those resources with the critical resources within the organization that were going to be needed to be able to drive the success. So it's a balance between additional resources from your partner and new world, old world methodology with the existing resources that you have.
I want to know if what type of application so far you are working on that, and with your, and what type of company you are working with, and so far.
From an application perspective, we've got your typical, three-tier web applications. We've got some operational systems that were migrated, database servers. Front-end client-facing applications, so a complete mix of anything you can think of from that perspective. And as far as the companies that we worked with Cloudreach as a partner, we worked with AWS as a partner.
OMG is one of our clients in the marketing and advertising space. At Cloudreach, we're pretty much industry agnostic. We work with companies across all industries. The financial sector, I think, is what you asked for. We have a few. I'm not sure how many names I can refer to. You can see them on the site. We have a couple of financial companies in the US and quite a few more in the UK.
But first of all, did you finish the migration, or is it still ongoing? And then you talked a little bit about what people think internally in the organization. I was just wondering if you had anything to say about politics as far as like what people were thinking, and if that added time to the equation, and if that was difficult at all to get people on board for that. So anything that you have to say on that?
One of our migrations is still ongoing. That one was a 10-week engagement overall, 2 weeks to rationalize systems and applications. It was about 185 applications, servers that had to be rationalized. That number came down to about 85 systems, which then tailed into a 8-week migration project.
A 7-week migration project.
Yeah, 7-week migration project, which is still ongoing. But from 185 servers and systems down to 85, first of all, because we were able to rationalize out some of them, and then be able to focus on the ones that needed to migrate. I think that's a very high turnaround. Then with regards to, as you said, the politics, it does play a part, but it's critical. That's why it's so critical to have everyone involved from the very beginning. That's kind of fundamentally what the hyper-accelerated approach requires, right? So you could take a team and migrate an application, but if they're doing it on their own and sort of in a silo and you don't have the entire organization involved, then that migration doesn't yield any benefits to the rest of the organization. So cutting through those politics and making sure that you have agreement across the entire organization, all the right silos, finance, security, operations, and infrastructure is critical.
I think the hardest piece is not really politics. Omnicom is a big enterprise. It's worldwide with a few agencies and corporate structures. It wasn't politics mostly, but time zones, different agencies, different people's times that you had to secure to work together. That was one of the hardest things, let's say, around. We started with a few applications in the US, and then the one we're talking about now is a full data center out of the UK. So aligning all those responsibilities and all those key stakeholders, mostly securing people's time, but that's what that new world, old world helped a lot too. We had executive sponsorship to cut out people's times for new world, which helped a lot through those, especially if you're split into time zones. It's really tough to get to that synergy together.
During the migration, you might have encountered a situation where the lift and shift of your existing on-prem to the cloud didn't quite make sense altogether. Could you tell us of a time where you had to sort of reinvent or get to ground zero and sort of build the app from scratch, and what tools you used on AWS to do that?
Probably one of the reasons why I'm quite qualified to talk on the subject. The only time we had that experience was when we didn't use a partner. And the lift and shift of the application yielded a lot of unknowns. On-prem, the solution worked just fine. But when it moved to the cloud, there were performance issues that we couldn't isolate. In the end, most of them were the result of unknowns about the application themselves, right? So in this one particular example that I'm thinking of, every single call to a particular page required Active Directory authentication. And the sizing of the domain controller sitting next to the application in the cloud wasn't appropriate to the amount of calls that it was receiving. So on-prem, the domain controller was sized differently because we were not paying for the infrastructure. In the cloud, we were like, okay, well, we'll size that more reasonably. The application, unfortunately, required more out of it. So that was an experience, right? We had to start from scratch and do it all over again. But had we, again, taken the approach defined here, where we were insisting on a low-level design up front and making sure that we were, making sure the traffic was north to south instead of east to west, and understanding those dependencies, we could have avoided that.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
You can visit Cloudreach at booth 327. Please join us for